Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, Introduction to Pivot Tables in Microsoft Excel, presented by one of our amazing technical instructors for today, Ed McRae. My name is Mariela Salinas, and I'll be assisting and moderating our session today. We are in Zoom for today's webinar, and we will be sharing a copy of this recording with all of you in an email after the webinar. We do encourage participation throughout the webinar, so please use the chat or that Q&A option for our short Q&A after the presentation. Educate 360 is so excited to present this webinar today. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to you, Ed.
All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our session. This is, of course, Intro to Excel Pivot Tables. It is my pleasure to be here with you. During this session, we are going to do a quick intro to pivot tables, talk about what they are, what we would use them to do, and then we'll look at several ways we can create them. We'll take a look also specifically at how to link multiple tables together using PowerPivot. We'll look at how we can work with calculated fields, and we will look at how we can utilize conditional formatting inside of our pivot tables. All right, so let's go ahead and pull over some data here. We'll pull over some data, and a pivot table, first of all, is going to create a consolidated report. All right. So we use pivot tables when we have repetitive data. You don't necessarily have to have a lot of data, although oftentimes you would. But when we have repetitive data, that is when we want to use a pivot table. So for an example like this, right, we have just some call center, just a data dump from a call center, right? And we got like 2,000 or so records, a lot of stuff, right? And so each time there was a new call, they're entering in the information for that call. So of course, everything is going to repeat, right? The agents, the product codes, the lines, the issues, the resolution codes, right? Everything is repeating. And because of the repetitive nature of the data, it becomes very difficult to analyze this in any kind of concise logical format. Like if I were to say, hey, show me the average call time per, for each agent per issue type, right? Good luck with that, right? You're gonna have a hard time doing that. You're gonna need to filter and copy and paste and all that kind of stuff, right? So what we can do instead is take it and dump it into a pivot table environment where it'll consolidate the values. Most commonly, we are going to create a pivot table based off of one table or range. And so I've got a table right here. I think it's a better idea to base it off of a table, but if it's not a table, as long as it's a continuous range of cells, that is fine as well. I'm going to go to Insert. I do have an option here for recommended pivot tables. Let's look at that real quick. This is just going to look at my data and give me the pivot tables that it recommends based on what I have here. All right, so I could say, oh, or I want to try this or this, right? Whatever the case might be. So if you're new to pivot tables or you're, still trying to figure it out, this is a great place to start until you kind of get your feet under you. I am going to just go ahead and create a pivot table from scratch. So I'm going to say pivot table. It is showing me the range that my pivot table is based on. I can choose whether to put it on a brand new worksheet or put it within an existing worksheet. So I'm going to put it on a new one. And then I have an option here talking about adding this data to the data model. We're going to talk about that in a few minutes. All right, we'll leave that blank for now. Let's click OK. Gives me my pivot table environment. All right, very quickly, because I don't want to spend too much time on this. We have 4 different places. If I look at my pivot table field list that's popping up on the right, I have 4 different sections of my pivot table, right? We have the filters area, which is at the top, and that is going to allow me to filter my whole pivot table for whatever data I put there. So right now, I have agents here, and if I had other data down below, I could filter all that information for a particular agent, okay? There is a much better way to do this called slicers and timelines, which we're not going to get into here, but just to say we don't really use the filters area as much as we did in the past because slicers and timelines are just better. We have our columns area, which is going to be a descriptive heading across the top of each column in our pivot table. We have our rows area, which is going to give me a descriptive heading at the beginning of each row. in the pivot table. And then we have the values area, which is where my calculations are going to take place. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a few moments, but we're always going to get a numerical result there. If it is a number field that we dropped in, it's going to do a sum for us by default. Anything else, it will default to doing a count calculation. All right. Okay. So then, let's just build a quick pivot table here. Let's do an example of like what I said, right? So we'll have the agents here in the rows. We have the lines in the columns, right? We always want to reserve columns and rows, like I said, for descriptive data. And then let's drop the call length into the values. And there we go. I can see in this case the total call length. We can change it to an average. I'll show you how to do that in a little bit. But I can see the total call length for each agent per line. Nice and easy, right? Now I can move this around, right? I can say, all right, let's move the lines under here. So I have like a grouping, looking at it that way. Let's drop the date into the columns, and now it's broken down per month, right? So whatever you want to do, however you want to arrange your data, we very easily can do that, right? So I'm going to name this table pivot. That's what I'm going to name this worksheet. Now, doing it based off of this one table or range is cool, but we are limited to only the information in that one table or range, right? So some of this information is not very descriptive. So like my agent abbreviations, I don't know what those mean. These issue codes, what's issue A? What's issue D? No clue. These resolution codes, what's Q350? No idea, right? But if I look over here on this other worksheet called Call Center Support, I will find that there is some descriptive data here that supports that other information, right? If I were in Power BI, I would call these dimension tables, right? And I would call this a fact table, for example. But anyway, these are all showing me supportive information. So I have like my agents. Oh, NC is in Costa, right? A Dillon. Okay, that's cool. They're in the North region, right? So I have more data. Oh, okay. Q350 is a level 2 resolution, which means it was resolved by a manager and blah, 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 right? So I can see all this detailed information. I would like to be able to use all this together with my fact data here, my call data, in one pivot table. The only way to do that is through the usage of PowerPivot, which allows me to create what is called a data model, right? A data model is basically a database that's going to live in the memory of Excel. It's going to house all of the information that we put in it. And we can then begin to generate pivot tables based on that data model. Now, we're not going to go into the PowerPivot environment because there's a whole PowerPivot tab and a whole data model environment and all that stuff. We're not going to cover that here in this session, but thankfully, they have given us the ability to access some PowerPivot features right here inside of Excel without having to go into the actual PowerPivot environment, right? And so that's what we are going to do. The first thing I'm going to do is build my data model. I'm going to start building it by clicking inside of my first set of data, which is going to be this call center data. And when I go back to insert and go back to pivot table, I am going to check this box at the bottom here that says add this data to the data model. Okay. Click OK. And this is, you notice it says loading data model down here. So it's initializing my data model for me behind the scenes without actually, taking me into PowerPivot. And let's rename this worksheet model pivot so we can juxtapose the difference there. All right. And we can hide these two. I don't really need these right now. All right. I noticed some differences immediately in my field list, right? My original pivot table here that's based just off of the one table. If I look at the field list here, I'm going to see I just have a flat set of fields. If I look at this data model pivot here, I see that I have an active tab and an all tab. And I also see that my fields are grouped together underneath the table that they came from. So all these call data fields are all grouped up under this table, right? And again, I am not getting that in my traditional pivot table, okay? If I mosey on over to the All tab here, I'm going to notice all of the other tables in my workbook are represented here. So if it's in that same workbook and it's in a table format, I can actually right away start using the data and it'll add the data or the table into the data model for me, right? So let's try it out. So agents, here's my actual agents table. Let's grab the agent name, drop that in there. Ooh, that's nice, right? So I can see the actual names of each agent. And then here's the test. Let's see if we can't grab some of this data. So I'm going to grab the sale amount from the call data table. Let's drop that in there. Original sale amount. And we run into an issue. And the issue we run into is there is no relationship currently between the call data table and this agent table, right? And it's telling me that right here. Relationships between the tables may be needed. So I need to relate those two tables together if I'm going to use fields from them in my pivot table. There is an auto detect feature here. I'm going to just go ahead and manually create. So I'm going to click create. And we have our table and then our related table. Now the table here that it's referencing is the foreign table or the table with the more duplicated information, which is going to be the call data table. And then the primary table is going to be the agent table or agents table. And I need to use a common field to connect them, which is going to be the agent field in this case. Click OK, and now it's working, right? It's displaying the right information. So I'm going to need to repeat that process each time I add in information from a different table. Let's add in the issue category here. Okay, it's going to repeat again. In the interest of time, I'm just going to auto detect these relationships. I'm going to say auto detect. It should go ahead and establish the relationship for me. That is fantastic. Okay, same thing would happen if I dropped in like product subcategory. Okay, it's duplicating. Let's auto detect that. Beautiful. And last but not least, how about some resolution? How about resolved by? And let's auto detect this as well. All right, this is fantastic. So I now have the ability to use any of these fields. I'm not going to worry about the date table here, but any of these fields from these different tables I can utilize as a part of my pivot table here. So let's look at our agents, the calls per agent. Let's break it down by issue explanation. And I think that's it. I think that's all I want to do right now. Maybe we'll do some other stuff with product categories or things like that maybe later or something. But I think this is good for now. All right, fantastic. So I am, again, this is the ideal, in my humble opinion, way to create a pivot table. If you have a lot of data, use a data model, right? It not only is going to allow you to use more data, but also if you are building like a dashboard or anything that's going to have multiple pivot tables or multiple pivot charts, it's going to be much easier because we now can very easily create pivot tables or pivot charts based on the data model without having to have extra worksheets, right? Like I could very easily go here and just say insert and do a pivot chart and just insert a solo pivot chart, right? Let's say, matter of fact, I'm clicked on this right now, so that's not what I want. But if I don't click on that and I go to pivot chart here, notice that it's going to use the data model. I can click OK, right? And now I have a pivot chart here based on that data model without having to have any extra sheets or have it be based off of a pivot table, right? And I could easily come in here now and just start to create whatever it is that I wanted to create in this pivot chart, right? So lots of advantages to using a data model over using just a regular table when you're building your pivot table. All right, let's talk about calculated fields. Now, there's already calculations happening in here, but these calculations are what we will call implicit calculations. And what that means, they're only taking place within the pivot table. They're not taking place elsewhere. So like I have the original sale amount. I can go into my field settings here and I could change the name of this. Let's change it to sales total. Let's get a accounting format happening here. Cool, right? I could very easily come in here and let's drop original sale amount in here again. And let's change this to an average, right? And switch to average. I'm going to call this average sale. Let's get some formatting happening, right? So these are all implicit, right? It only exists here. Let's do one more. Drop this in here and let's get the usage or let's say contribution percentage. And let's have it show this as a percent of the grand total. Okay. Done, right? Super easy, right? And we could continue to do that. So all of that is just implicit. If I created a whole new pivot table, matter of fact, if I came over to this pivot table over here, all right, let's get these dates and stuff out of here, right? If I were to drop sale amount in here, it's right back to the same original formatting, original title, right? Original calculation, right? So these calculations that we do that way are implicit. Calculated fields allow us to create what's called explicit calculations, right? I want to know how much commission, and explicit calculations basically means that they are going to exist within any pivot table. They're going to be a part of our field list, and they're going to basically be available within any pivot table that's based on the same data model or data set that we're working with. So I'm going to go here and you know what? Let's see if I can actually do that with a data model. We might have to go to our table pivot to do this. I'm going to go over to pivot table, analyze. It looks like I still can. I'm going to go to fields, items, and sets. Yes, it's going to make me do it in PowerPivot, which I don't want to do because we're not showing that. So I'm going to do this over here in a traditional pivot table. If time permits, I'll show you how we would do it in the PowerPivot environment as well. But let's say I want to calculate the commission that each agent is earning. I am going to go to Analyze, Fields, Items, and Sets. I'm going to choose to do a calculated field. I'm going to name this field Commission. And I'm going to say, let's say they're getting a 13% commission, right? Original sale amount times 13%. Click OK. And there it is, right? It generates that for me. I could come over here and rename this earned commission, right? And notice that I see that showing up here in my field list, like so, okay? And so now any other pivot tables that I create, if I created a whole new pivot table, and let me unhide this main worksheet here. If I created a whole new pivot table based off of this same data, and let's say I didn't use the model, I'm just going to base it off of this. Notice that my commission calculation is sitting right there. And I could easily still reuse that. I don't have to recreate the calculation. All right. So that's pretty cool. Now, in a model situation, the reason why this is grayed out is because once I start using PowerPivot, it wants me to create the calculated field in PowerPivot. I could still do that. Just to quickly show you, I would have to actually go into the PowerPivot data model, and it's not loading that for some reason, so I guess we're not going to do that. All right, but I could do that same exact thing inside of PowerPivot, and then it would show up over here for any of the pivot tables or pivot charts that I created based on that. All right, let's keep moving into our last little tidbit here, which is conditional formatting inside of a pivot table, right? Now, conditional formatting inside of a pivot table is going to initially start out the same way. The difference is going to be within a pivot table, it is going to give me a scope to allow me to choose where I want it to actually apply the conditional formatting, all right? So for example, let's get some subtotals in here for our agents, shall we? Let's throw some subtotals in here, and we'll put them at the top of each group. All right. So I have these subtotals here. So let's say that my goal for sales is 20 million, right? Say my goal is 20 million. Let's say between 15 and 20 million, I wanted to put an OK symbol, and then anything under 15 million, I wanted to put a negative symbol, right? So we'll use an icon set. Now, the problem that I have is that is only for the totals, right? It does not apply to these subtotals here, which are for the issue type. So if I just do a regular conditional formatting, it's going to apply the rule to everything. And so all these values are going to get that negative symbol. I don't want that. So let's take a look at how we can set up a scope for where the conditional formatting is to be applied. I'm going to go to conditional formatting, and I'm going to do an icon set here. More rules. All right, so if I take a look here, the scope is the first thing that shows up. So it's going to apply the rule by default to the selected cells, which is this cell right here. I don't want that. I can choose to do all cells showing sale totals value for explanation. So that would be all these. Or I could say all cells showing sales total values, right? And that's what I want. I just want the sale total ones, not the explanation ones as well. All right, so I've set that scope up. And now I can do the rest of my conditional formatting in the way I would normally do it, right? We're going to do an icon set. And I'm going to go ahead and set up just a custom icon set here. Some custom icons. And let's do numbers instead of percentages. And we said that our goal is 20 million. And we said that our intermediate goal is 15 million. All right, I'm going to click OK. And there we go. Now that did not do what I wanted to do, so I think I might have misclicked somewhere. So let's go back in and take a look at that. Let's edit this rule. Okay, there it is. It changed to agent now. You know what? It's because of the cell I was clicked on. So I actually wanted to do just for the agent name, sales total for agent name, right? Because I was clicked in one of these for the explanation, that's why it gave me that. So, all right. So we'll switch that. That's not a problem. We'll click OK. We'll click OK, and now it's doing what we want it to do. Okay. So it's only applying the conditional formatting to these sales totals for each agent. All right. It is not applying it to these explanations, and that's great. That's what I want. So I could easily now come here and just collapse all these. And now when I'm just looking at the agents and their totals, I can see all the icons. If I were to expand this, I'm not seeing that for these guys underneath. Okay, so that's pretty cool. All right, so we see what pivot tables are and what we use them to do. We see how we can create them. We see the difference between creating them based off of one table, where it's only allowing us to use the information from that one table, or based on a model of multiple tables using PowerPivot. We see the advantage of doing that. We also see how we can create calculated fields. Again, I wanted to show you what it would look like in PowerPivot, but I think I have to reload PowerPivot here. But we do see how we can do calculated fields just in a regular pivot table here as well. By the way, if I wanted to edit that, I could go back to fields, items, and sets, calculated field, and I can just choose the field right from here, and I can edit it or delete it if I wanted to. And then lastly, we can see how conditional formatting is a little bit different here inside of our pivot table, where we are able to control the scope. All right, we are coming towards the end of our time, and so what I'd like to do at this time is, Mariella, throw it back over to you. And if there are any questions that are there, we can address them at this time.
Absolutely, Ed. Awesome. So we did have a couple of questions here, so I will hopefully get to all of them in a timely manner. We had one here from Maggie. Can a connection be made between different workbooks, or do they need to be all in the same workbook slash different sheets in the same workbook?
They all need to be in the same workbook. Each workbook only has one data model. And so you would have to, if the data was in a different workbook, you would have to actually either link to it or import it into your data model from that other workbook. But it all has to be in that one workbook.
Excellent. Great info to have. We have a couple more here coming in. Thank you so much for throwing them in the chat, everyone. We actually had a missed step. They said, I missed the step to select data model. When he can he go over that step one more time?
Yeah, sure. So when you're initially creating your pivot table, all right, I'm initially creating the pivot table, insert pivot table. It's a checkbox right down here that says add this data to the data model. And then you just make sure you check that off.
Excellent. Awesome. And we had think a couple more, which I think we can get to. And we had another one here from Byron. Can we point or source a data model from Power BI or Tableau servers?
Absolutely. So for that, you would need to either import the data into Excel. So if you went over to data, you'd actually use Power Query to import the data into Excel, or inside of the data model itself, which I can't pull up right now. You'll have the same options to import into the Power Pivot data model. So yes, you could do that.
Fantastic info. Awesome. Hope that answered your question. We had, I think, two more. Yeah, we had two more, and one here from John asked, how could you integrate SQL with a pivot table?
If you're talking about SQL code, not really. If you're talking about SQL data, it will be the same way that I just said with the Power BI stuff. So you'd either need to import it into Excel first and then use that data as a part of your pivot table, or you would need to import it into the Power Pivot data model, and then you could use it from there.
Great info to have. Awesome. And then our last question here would be also from John. Thanks so much for the questions, John. Is Power Pivot Table included in Excel or is it a paid add-on?
Yes, Power Pivot has been included in Excel since Office 2016. So it's built right in. You can access it whenever you want.
Excellent. And if there are any last minute questions, you can go ahead and throw them in the last 2 minutes. But just as a quick reminder, if you guys need any more info on this topic, please do not be afraid to visit us at newhorizons.com. And if you missed out on any part of the session, we will definitely be sharing that recording with all of you in an email after the webinar. And I think that will do it for us today. Oh, we had another question here. Great certifications or courses for Excel learning as it relates to advanced skills.
That I do not know off the top of my head, unfortunately, but if you go to Microsoft's website, they have a whole certifications area, and you can search for certifications specifically for Excel.
Gorgeous. Love to see it. And I love all this fantastic feedback we are getting. Thank you all so much for attending today. And of course, thank you so much, Ed.
My pleasure.
Awesome, everyone. Well, thank you so much again. I hope you have a fantastic Friday Eve. Enjoy your Thursday, and we will hopefully see all of you in the classroom. Bye, everyone.